Yay, we're late. We're a couple minutes late. We had live streaming problems. It was saying that I was not able to live stream. It's like, live stream is not available right now. Retry, retry, retry. It's like, ah. Well, so greetings, everybody. I'm Clifford Bates. You know who I am. This is the Friday live stream. We have nobody here, so I don't, and I'm going to be probably having pains in the ass with the computer all day. Okay, shut it down. Let's just kill some space. Everything is kind of like up in the air today because of system. So, like I said in my in the thing, there's no real plans. I had no real plans for today, simply because why? It was nothing to do. Well, I mean, people say, "Oh, there's a lot to do." Well, what I have to do today. Well, recount what happened this week. Let's do my normal like, what happened this week? My classes. My U.S. course at Norwich was kind of slow. The students were actually rather active at the beginning of the week. We had the student active. I have only 2 students this semester, this term, this class. It's a MA tutorial on basically, history of diplomacy, the formation of the European state system and the structures and things like this. And we're now into the First World War. This week was about dealing with the question. Last week was the alliance structure, the concert of Europe, and things like that. That led to and the alliance systems that led to the First World War. Today is the post-World War One situation and the question of appeasement, the failure at Versailles, and the implications of American and post 1918 diplomacy, which is focused more on the question of trying to avoid a war again, right? And trying to limit arms and things like this. So therefore, that it's okay. I'm not as satisfied with my 2 group of students as I normally would be. So it's been kind of frustrating. The students are usually much more active. Students who take this course tend to be more active. Maybe it is generational change and how the new students are not going to be as active as older students, previous generations. My Polish classes, we finished the last group. My key methods, where we did 2 classes, sections of methods on basically introduction to statistics, a kind of basic thrust of how statistics are useful in understanding social science and research. So we talked about the way application of it in terms of, using Charles Murray's classic little essay, which is part of both Bell Curve and his other work about the application, the use of statistics by those who don't even know like statistics, which is a very good introduction to this. The only thing you need to do is add certain things like and make it clear what does mean mean, what does average mean in modes, and that thing, and tying this to the question of distribution curves and things like standard deviation and things like that, and what is normal and typical and mean this, and how we find it in demographic analysis. So it's kind of like a little bit of how to understand, the tools you need to understand demographic analysis, and to do pattern recognition through things like correlation and regression. A little bit of that to understand, and the application of it in terms of plot graphing variables and things like this. This is basic social science 101. Someone said maybe I should cover that in a video. You did the Van Evera book. Why don't you do something like this on this? And I said, there's other people who do this better than I do. But that's the course. It was like that. We finished the rest group. We started the public for my course on the creation of the American Constitution. The previous week we finished the Philadelphia Convention. Now this week we start the period before the state ratifying debates. Start with what I call the public debate. I'm going to Budapest next week, so I'm not going to have class. And then the week after that, I'll have a class on Tuesday. After I come back, there'll be a Tuesday cast, the 30th of April. But then Poland has the May holidays, May 1st and May 3rd. May 1st is, European Labor Day, old communist Labor Day, and that's still Labor Day for most European countries and most of the world. American Labor Day was anti-communist. That's why it's in September, not in May. Then there is May 3rd, the Polish holiday, May 3rd, or Constitution Day, celebrating the May Constitution of in the 1790s, which led to the partition, because the 3rd of May Constitution. So therefore, the idea that this is a big holiday in Poland, 3rd of May Constitution. Even though it was a failure, it led to the partitions of Poland by Prussia, Austria, the Austrian Holy Roman Empire at this time still, and then Catherine of Russia, chopping things up, the partitions, the second and third partitions. And that's the holidays, and then we come back to class the week after. So I'm kind of like, yay, I have no class. I'm having a former student of mine, and now who's a colleague, Michal Kurtz, who's works at a private school. I asked him would he cover my Constitution class and talk about the Federalist debates, the Federalist anti-Federalist debates a little bit. Just give the students that meet the class get additional class on the Federalist debates, and let him kind of do something, let him get kind of exposed. It's kind of been my intention to kind of maybe hope that my department will hire him and move him from the private school to the state school for a little more security, job security. But this is how things operate in this world. So that's my teaching. That's what I did for the teaching week. My own reading, writing, research. Well, I've been a bad boy. I've really been focused more on helping my students. I have like I've got basically 6 BA students who need help in research, and I spent my time helping them more than helping me, doing research things and things like this. I'm getting prepared for my Budapest conference. I'm thinking about what I'm doing. I got my paper mostly written. I need to. I'm going to come back with when I come back from the conference. I will have enough feedback. I will add more stuff. I want to add some more stuff to it, but I would like to just present the paper as I have it, and then come back and then edit it after post feedback, and then maybe address the question of trying to publish it someplace. I still haven't heard. One of the journals that was supposed to issue in March hasn't released, so I'm nervous. It's my piece on political change that they accepted, and they're going to be published. And I was like really good and happy that it's published. It has a lot of points in the Polish system. Now it looks like it's not going to be published yet, so it's kind of making me nervous what's happening. And then the article I submitted in January to another Polish journal, and that's in Poznan, the Political Science Review, different name in Polish. They have not contacted me back, and I'm getting kind of a little anxious. That listen, if you're not going to, if you're not, I don't know what's going on. Are you reviewing it? Are you not reviewing it? Have you rejected it? What's going on? Because I'm not supposed to submit. If you're not going to tell me, I'm going to submit it to another. I want to submit it someplace else because I want to get it published. So this is frustrating in that sense. I have been taking notes on things. I need to go take notes and work on it. I have not looked at my constitutionalism thing on the change, the 4 changes, the 4 small changes on the Constitution. That I have some articles I need to add to it and send it out to a journal. I don't know why. It's been kind of. I think I was kind of recovering from the bug that everyone has. And then last but not least, some of my Aristotle stuff I need to go look down to. So my videos, okay, this is quickly doing video things. We're in the middle, we're right now in the video recording on the friendship discussion. What's live now is you're probably in the book 7, still on the question of entraka and ekrasa, which is self-restraint and lack of self-restraint, right, problem, and how that adds to the whole question of virtue and political act, correct action and virtue, and how it modifies the difference of the question of how we understand virtue and what is the virtuous man, what's the prudent man, what's the moderate man in that sense. The friendship stuff is good. I have been really working well, reading. Like I said, I've been reading. Like I said last week, I talked about something about reading. I've been rereading, Cicero's De Mecca, and I'm really thinking about maybe doing something about this. The video I want to do, I promised people I'd do it. It was going to be the redoing of the Prince. I will do the Prince. I'm thinking about. I want to do a course. I want to do a popular course on the Prince, only the Prince, reading the Prince, and getting students to read the Prince and think about the Prince. And I'm thinking about working with the Polish Open University here, doing it, but I have to write the thing, and I have to do it's paperwork, and it's a pain in the ass. But I think I'll do it, and I'm going to make a video. I'm going to do again. I'm going to once again do a video series on the Prince, redoing the Prince. I have everything ready to do it. And the question is, will I be doing that, and will I continue doing? Like I said, I will do that after the Aristotle, so the summer. I'll do this. The thing I also want to do is maybe do the human ethics a little bit, because it's been interesting to do. I would like to see, it would be maybe useful to contrast the two, the Aristotle's, we're doing the Nicomachean ethics, but contrasting the Eudemian ethics to that might be useful for people to see how these two different books, which cover the same theme but in slightly different ways, are useful to each other and interconnect with each other. So that's that. Those are the things. That's my video creation in the future. People saying, "Why don't you do some more modern stuff?" And I've said, "Well, okay, I would." Or those stuff. I don't really want to do. I mean, I could do Leviathan, but it's a pain in the ass to do Leviathan. Leviathan would be difficult to do because it's long. The chapters are longish. If I did it chapter by chapter by chapter, people might like it. Okay, that might be doable. But at the same time, doing it is kind of like one of these pains, in fact, I have a video, sir. I mean, we did a reading of the whole. Our reading group read through the whole laws. Hobbes. I have recordings of the video group, and I'm not sure what to do with it. It's kind of like do we want to make it public or not? We went through the whole Leviathan, cover to cover. Our Saturday reading group. And I think it is a good thing. We also did something on Shakespeare's history plays that I recently made an archive. We're just missing one recording of one session on Richard on Henry VI, Part 1, a section that's which would be wonderful to have if someone has it. But the whole recording archive of all the meetings is like, ooh. So that gets us to the next stage of what I'm doing video wise. Now to the live streams. We had basically two feedbacks. We had a couple of feedbacks. Some people liked what I did and saying thank you, and I'm not going to say it like this. I want to go back to Corlitz's thing that I didn't really do about Christopher Latch and David Godwin about the question of Matt Goodwin's graduation elite. 2 weeks ago he raised the question about talking about elites, right? The question of elites, bringing the attention of Christopher Latch, and I talked about Christopher Latch a little bit. Chris Latch is a very interesting character of the left. He is kind of what we call the populist left. His initial work he's a sociologist in that sense, and as someone trained in also the question of sociology and society. He was kind of very much a Tocqueville, what we call part of the Tocqueville approach about this to communitarians, critical of liberalism in that sense. Latch's famous book was kind of the Culture of Narcissism book, that late 1970s. That was very influential and popular. He wrote a book about Emerson and called they call it True and Only Hope. I forget the True and Only Heaven. No, I have it over there. The True and Only Heaven. It's one of the books that I had, which was his reevaluation of showing a kind of more communitarian Emerson rather than a liberal Emerson. And the idea of community. It's a defense of communitarian. Now, this we have to remind us that this was the debate in the 1980s and the early 1990s. There was this we call the liberal versus communitarian debate that happened. It was one of the first things I did as a graduate student. I was asked to write a book review for the History of European Ideas journal, because Morty Frisch encouraged me to, write a book review. As a doctoral student, so you should write a book review. So they asked me to review this book by a famous, a kind of Hegelian Marxist, edited this series by a reader about this. And I wrote my first book review on that. So, and this is something this was interesting. I was sympathetic to some aspects of the libertarian. Growing up a child of the right, particularly the post-war World War II right, I was influenced by the old right thinkers of like Pete Mencken, Alfred Nock, and Rose Lane Wilder, Isabella Patterson, and other these writers, and then that led to someone like Bill Buckley, and the right, which then introduced me to people like Wilmore Kendall, Frank Meyer, and this whole movement. So Russell Kirk as well, this whole tradition of conservative movement, which had a broad thing. And likewise, people like Robert Nisbet, who was a sociologist, and that was very much shaped me. James Burnham in foreign policy, in the whole school of these things. This is the kind of influence. And at the same time, when I was in high school, I was reading science fiction. High school, there was Nisbet, the science fiction of Jerry Pournelle, David Niven, Larry Niven? Larry Niven, not David Niven, not the actor David Niven, but and also Robert Heinlein. Right, Heinlein's libertarianism and political libertarianism and conservatism was very well known in his political writings. I was not a big I knew people who were very Ayn Randy. I read it as being part of it. It's need to be read it, but I was always kind of like the lukewarm to Rand. I liked more Heinlein, and I liked more of the work of Pournelle, and as fiction. I found, as for political theory, I found some of her arguments problematic and not that persuasive. Even though I might agree with some things, I think she sometimes went too far. Rand did. But why am I mentioning all this? Well, this is the idea of people like Latch. The communitarian debate of the late 1980s, early 90s was the big debate. This was the big debate between the so-called. In fact, this was also part of what we call, even someone like Wood. What's his name? Gordon Wood, the American political historian of the Constitution and founding period. His book was kind of an attack. This was the idea. This was the thing that was in Pocock, the Republican versus this fight between Republicans versus liberals, right? And therefore, this Republicanism and J.J. Pocock's Machiavellian moment and his other work, kind of this attack on liberalism, this criticism of liberalism as kind of and that this was you find this also in some of these other historians, American historians. Balin's was more of Bernard Balin was the classic. He was kind of like this idea of liberalism and this tradition. There was the critique against Balin to some degree. The idea that this fight between republicanism and liberalism, this was brought in kind of by the Pocock and Skinner's Cambridge School approach to this issue. That they saw this debate fight between republicanism, which was a kind of what you call the Renaissance humanistic republicanism versus rational and rational liberalism, right? Rational, and this conflict and the history of political thought. And the American Revolution was the triumph. Was this, was the argument was it republicanism or was it this liberalism? And this is the kind of the Charles Beard's hypothesis was that the revolution was Republican, but the the constitutional moment was the triumph of liberalism against republicanism, the coup d'etat argument, the economic, Charles Beard's economic causes of the Constitution. I forget the title, but this is a dominant theory. Now people like Forrest McDonald and others at the time basically deconstruct in the 1950s and 60s. And people like Forrest McDonald are very much tied to the conservative movement. People I knew, like Bradford, they basically showed the untruthfulness of this. But then Skinner Pocock kind of brought it back with the Republican versus, instead of it being capitalist versus yeoman farmers, it became now the idea of republicanism versus, Gordon Wood's radicalism of the American Revolution pointed to this idea that this was kind of taken from kind of Pocockian Skinner hypothesis of republicanism versus liberalism debate. And again, this is how we can define the whole issue of political theory of the late 1980s and early 90s as this contestation. Now, we can see this also in the fight between the libertarian versus Rawls versus Nozick, right, in the 1970s. It was Rawls' theory of justice that kind of restored political philosophy in both philosophy circles and political circles, but Nozick's response to it, Nozick kind of giving up a kind of alternative, more minimalist idea. So the positive versus negative liberty approach of both these approaches. Well, this starts in the 70s, conceptual philosophy, this debate between there's two schools of liberalism. Then there's the challenge, the idea that in the political thought and history of the idea of this whether it was the Constitution really this radical, was the revolution really this revolutionary populist Republican moment, and the Constitution a kind of reaction and establishment of capitalism and liberalism, or is it like someone like Paul Ray in his classic Republic's Ancient Modernism, the third volume, which is published not only as a single book but also as 3 separate paperback volumes. In his third book, he makes the claim, and it's the whole point of the second volume and third volume, is that the modern tradition is that you get Republican, particularly with Locke, and Locke, someone like Algernon Sidney, and Truncheon Gordon's Cato's Letters, is this fusion of republicanism and liberalism, not the antithesis, but rather it was kind of a fusion of these two things. That therefore, to read that what happened was a kind of antithesis. As a conflict between these two, rather than know that the people that like Montesquieu and others, Montesquieu's a liberal, but he's also winks to republicanism, right? This is the problem of this whole thing. So therefore, we have to understand this whole to understand what Latch is up to. We have to understand not only this fight within this communitarian debate, but at the same time, Latch is also very much critical of how elites emerged, and how elites were going, and how capitalist elites, and particularly this, were abusing things. And it's one of the last books that he wrote was The Revolt of the Elites, the Revolt of the Elites is a very good book in that sense, because it is a part of what we call the communitarian argument, the communitarian view that communities do it. Now, the problem with the communitarian argument is that this is both a left-wing view, or, an infamous moment back at the beginning of 1992, Hillary Clinton made a famous line that it takes a village to raise a child, right? But the problem is the question is, and this is the big problem, What Hillary Clinton and liberals mean by village is not the same. See, traditional conservatives will agree with Mark with that claim, but it does take a village. It takes a village. In other words, people are shaped and moved by their local priorities, their communities, their values, their families. Their families are supported by their local communities, which involves their church, the religion, how they worship God, how they worship their patriarch. This idea of this bottom up inculcation of tradition and culture, tradition, custom, and culture that shapes it now. Now, the problem with the Hillary Clintons of the world is that they don't mean that. They mean state. They must top down. That takes a village means that no. It takes the society and the experts and the teachers and social service elites and the social workers and things like this. So there's a joke that Hillary Clinton, when she says it takes a village, she doesn't really mean it. She means it takes the state. Okay. When she said that thing in 1992, that famous thing. That's what the problem was. And what happened was there's this natural tendency. The libertarian argument, when they heard her, see, this is the whole fight in what we call the collectivist versus individualist argument, right? This whole argument in history, political philosophy, which I think is a false debate. It is a fundamentally misleading and false debate. The idea, we talk about this community, it's collectivism, you're a collectivist. Oh, no, everyone is an secret, atomic individual, free will, willing. This is a joke. I mean, because human beings are animals. They're social, political animals, okay, political animals. We have, social is a kind of problematic word. We're political animals in this sense. Even political, we say political, we think state, but no, it means the public. And this idea of this, we are creatures who need each other, who grow up. We're born in families. We're reared together, and we're reared by this. In other words, we're not. Harold, how are you? I see you saying. I hope all was well with you. My old high school buddy, Harold, is watching. I'm happy to see him there. I don't want to go too much about his life now, and his going through with his certain things, but I hope he's well, and I hope he enjoys watching, meaning paying attention. But someone like Latch's whole argument was, at the time when he wrote this, was that the elites no longer cared. The elites saw themselves as an insular thing that really they spoke about community values, but they didn't really believe in it. And they had very much hatred towards the thing. So this is interesting. So someone like Christopher Latch is writing this from the left. At the same time, I'm glad you're feeling well, Harold. At the same time, like people like Sam Francis, Sam Francis was a very good friend of my professor, Mel Bradford, and these were Southerners, Southern conservatives, activist Republicans. Well, they were state-right Democrats who became Republicans in the 1970s and late 60s, late 70s, mid-70s, and 80s. And they were part of the Reagan things. And Sam Francis was not really Mel was really a teacher and educator. Sam was more of a journalist. He was a journalist. He was very much tied to this. And Sam Francis's position about looking at this idea of the middle class is being destroyed by this progressive liberalism, and his development ideas of the middle as that if any, and I think this is Bradford's position too, the yeoman farmer. This idea, and it goes all the way back to people like Thomas Jefferson. The idea is that America is supposed to be a situation where everyone, we're not peasants. We don't have peasants. We have yeoman farmers. What is a yeoman farmer? This is a freeman. It's a civic construction where they're citizens. They are farmers, or in other words, they have that they're farmers, that their farm is done so that they have the means of surviving and able to do it. They can also be small shop owners. They can be people who offer collective services for the community. Remember, that's the whole purpose of a business, is to offer services needed by a community. And this is why we have to understand this regime that the founders wanted was a regime of free citizens, self-governing citizens in this sense, communities, local up, and that yes, the state is here. Therefore, you have at the larger state level, you had representative structures, but in the local community, you had actual self-government. And what happened was that, following from the English tradition, local communities were always acting on exercising this power of the central state, exercising the crown power, royal prerogative, and therefore exercising it in this sense. So Latch is saying, listen, that what's happening is that global capitalism and global structures that it's created a new elite, an elite that at this national and now transnational level, they had more in common with each other than they did with the people who are that they were supposed to be representing. Again, that's the famous Robert Neuhaus argument in his book Political Parties at the turn of the 20th century. The Italian with a German name, Robert Neuhaus, writing a book about social democratic governments in Germany at the turn before the turn of the century, and how even that you had looking at why did the elected representatives of the various parties. Well, I mean, that's right. Now, Harold raised the question that elected officials weren't supposed to be lifetime jobs. And that was true. That was the thing. But the problem is that they do. They will become because of at the national level. In other words, the old days, the national level, in the times of kings, what happened was that a king would appoint a baron or a lord to do a function. Okay, this is the purpose. This is what particularly the English system. The English monarchy is it's not an absolute monarchy. It was restrained money by law, but it was still monarchical. There's something in government service of a state or of a realm, of a nation. There's going to need to have a certain permanent class to this. And how they did it was the king would control them. They would appoint them. They would have their authority to them, and the king could remove them if they didn't. In other words, what happened? This is the stories of English minister things. If you didn't please the king, chop off the head. Right? There was a big price for failing to do what your king wanted. In that sense, now us Republicans, by small r's, are political things. We didn't want to have a king anymore, but we wanted to have we needed to have this, so we allowed presidents to appoint people to their service to do things. We would allow armies in that sense. This is standing armies to do certain things. These are careers in that sense. That there is this at one level there needs to be people who have that. This is the problem. It was always the problem that once you have a standing army or standing bureaucracy, you need a check on it, and that you need people who are trained and professional to deliver it. But at the same time, they need to be controlled by the rulers. The political rulers, or what will happen is that they will rule in their own interests, right? That's the classic problem in that sense. So this is the problem of elites in that sense. And someone like Sam Harris is writing looking at the 1990s and early thousands and sees the kind of how the global elites are pursuing policies of destroying communities. And that this led to a kind of crisis in belief in that sense. So therefore we can see a lot of today's issues already taking place in the 1990s. Okay, so it's not like like what's happening. The globalism and the problem like this is only reaching its crisis now, but it's been going around for 30 years in that sense. It was alive and well in the 1990s. In fact, the end of the Cold War led to the real possibility of a truly global elite, commercial elite. Because why? Because in the Cold War you had three competing three antithetical economic zones. The first, the Western world, then the world of the free world, the Western developed powers. Then you had the Soviet and the communist world, and you had different communists. You had even had breaks among the communists. You had the Russian communists, the Chinese communists, and then you had Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia kind of broke away a little first, but it was still communist in that sense, right? It still had this remaining, there was the Soviet sphere, and then Yugoslavia, and this kind of breakaway aspect of it, and then but still it was kind of an intermediate player. It was still kind of a closed economy, closed trading things. But then then the Chinese sphere, right, and the breach of that. But then you had the non-aligned, they were mostly post-colonial. They didn't like they're tied to the European colonial powers like India, Latin America, and Africa. Mostly Africa, and most of the leadership of the non-aligned thing came from Africa. That with some Latin American leaders taking a role in here. Again, they were the Latin Americans had a double fold. They had a resentment. They at one sense were resentment to places like Spain and the Europeans, but they also disliked the Americans as being too powerful and having too much influence over them. And that in other words, America succeeded while they failed to unify remember, you have to understand Latin America. Latin American Bolivar wanted to accomplish what Washington and the Americans did, but it failed. Okay, this is the thing that the Americans gave them at the time all the goodwill possible to succeed at the time, and the Latin Americans failed. So this is something that people have to understand. So back to something like Chris Latch. Chris Latch's Revolt of the Elites is a very powerful book in this sense. It was ahead of its time, and therefore it should be read. I think what's his name, Kotkin recently book on the elites. He wrote some, and even someone like Michael Lind and his stuff on all these new books on elites are kind of really retreading the same areas that someone like Christopher Latch initially gave us in the 1990s, 96, 97 book, if I remember correctly. Goodwin's book, or David Goodhart's book on Somewheres and Everywheres, it's a nice, cool thing. He's looking at the British example. This is a kind of rephrasing of it, and also Matt Goodwin's and Ertweil's book National Populism is just the more social science statistical analysis of what happened after post 2008 economic crisis and the political reaction and the reaction to the economic attempt by the Germans and the EU to kind of force austerity on a lot of countries and the economic consequences of austerity on European political culture. And then at the same time, the greater improving austerity benefits the elites, not the populace. And then at the rise of the green environmentalist, green movement, green policy, and now the current European Green Deal, again benefits big corporations and elites and harms the local peoples, farmers, and other things. So you have this crisis that's being addressed here, and I think this is the issue. This is someone said to me, I'm repeating what the letters are, and I said, like that. And I would just sort of point people to what happened this week, last couple of days in Brussels with the National Conservative Convention, of how this coalition of the EU globalists, the EU institutionalists, the radical socialist mayor of Brussels, who is pro-Muslim and because you have all these Muslim migrants living in this, populists living in there. And then you have who's both this kind of Muslim max with left-wing activism, social leftist, progressive leftism, this merger of Islamic fascism with progressive radical socialist leftism, this interconnection of these two things. in their hostility to what happened, and the attempt to shut it down, the attempt to because they control police power using the power of the state and the local and the corruptions of the local courts. They had to go to the higher. Finally, only going to the NatCon host organizers, only getting to the higher court, the higher national court, which then overturned, saying that the local officials had no right to ignore the Belgian constitution and European law. So the NatCon conference, again, they're on YouTube. You can go watch it. Please go watch it. NatCon is a weird situation because I know some people who argue that this is kind of a. I know some I know some ethnic nationalists who oppose NatCon because it's who is the organizer of it, and they view it as kind of a false flag operation by what he call liberals, what he calls liberal conservatives, to capture and kidnap the movement. I don't buy that. I think that's a too cynical view. Although I have problems with what I think it is kind of a fusionism. It's a kind of new fusionism. It's an attempt to what Yazoni is. I like Yazoni. I think he's a very interesting guy. His scholarship on Judaism is very good. I have an issue with his nationalism book a little bit, but The Virtues of National book is a good book, and his conservatism book is again likewise a good book. For what it is in that sense, it's Anglo-American liberalism in that sense. He's an activist. I don't have a problem with what he's doing in that sense, but I think he's kind of trying to follow the way he's a little bit touchy as to more ethnic nationalists who might have a Jewish problem. Okay, and there is a problem in ethno-nationalism with Jews, because Jews in Europe, and sometimes particularly left Jews, tend to have a anti-nationalist attitude. And therefore, there is this resentment of this, both in that situation as that they are destabilizing an enemy force within it, and that the roles of certain liberal leftist Jews like Soros and things like that, and their way they're funding an attack on nation states and national identities, both in Europe and in America, with the way he's funding the radical progressive DAs and things like that. So this is so the NatCon conference and how it happened there is, their attempt to shut it down actually gave them more attention than they would have gotten otherwise, and the failure to do that actually might really help the movement in some ways. So it was kind of a weird thing. I had a friend, this guy I know, Ed, who's an older American from Los Angeles. I know we met on Facebook. We were very good friends. He'd come visit me before with my wife. He visited me a couple years ago. And he comes from Poland. He's ethnic. His parents were Latvian, so he understands the communist world in that sense. He's a little older now, and he's kind of retired, but he takes active. He goes to all these events like the Mencken Society, Philly meetings, and things like this. And he went to the event. He was telling me, giving me news of what happened. And he's going to be going to the event by the New Cultural Forum in England now. He's in England now. I mean, I wish I had the means to go to these events, but I don't. I'm a poor Polish teacher, and I can't afford such trips. Actually going to Budapest is going to hit the bank wallet a little bit myself. So now let's go talk about what is next, the next letter, and we got 40 minutes here. One discussant, Joshua, says Fukuyama, right? The End of History, his books on political order, right? He says, is he worth reading? Now, yeah, he is. I mean, I have talked about Fukuyama before. Maybe I will talk about Fukuyama. Fukuyama is an interesting character, but he's also a problematic character. He is a liberal. He's a weird character. I think in many ways, the people call him a neocon. He was kind of part of the. He went to study foreign policy. I mean, he was part of the elite thing, Telluride cent location, a part of Cornell, studied under Bloom and other people who would, and then went to study doctoral studies. I think Harvard, maybe Chicago. I think Chicago, no, Chicago, and studied with Bloom. And he was kind of like interested in Hegel and things like this and bureaucracy. After getting his PhD, instead of becoming an academic, he went to go to work in the Rand Institute. And then he was writing these lectures, and that became famous. That lecture on Hegel, on the end of history, became famous, because of a conference Bloom made in 1989, just before the collapse of just before, I think 88, just before the collapse of the Berlin Wall. The article gets published, ends the fall issue of Public Interest in 1989. So this article becomes superstar, megastar. And 2 years later, he will write a book, which is a collection of his essays, right? All his papers and speeches that he had on Nietzsche and Hegel, and tied them together, and End of History and The Last Man, right? Which is a weird book in that sense. It is kind of like all my public lectures on things that I've not done. And then it offered him a job opportunity. Certain people invited him. I think Lipset invited him to go to George Mason, and he was hired with George Mason to do work. He wrote his second book on trust. Then he wrote his, I think, a third book on the biological future, which kind of showed the limitations of the argument of the Kojevian Fukuyama idea of the end of history argument, and saying that you only end history when the humanity reaches height evolutionary peak, the post-human future book. Then he got his job at a place at Johns Hopkins, teaching foreign policy stuff and things like this. He wrote his book on the state, and he kind of then had some, his 2004, 2004 election, he kind of like backed away from supporting his earlier neocon friends, because now he was now at the university and was looking at a future, maybe getting a job at which he will finally get a job. I think was at Stanford. Yeah, he'd get a job at Stanford, I think, finally at the end of the day. But then he also starts. It was the 25th anniversary, 30th anniversary, 1968. So it was 2008 would be the year of 68, 78, 88, 98, 208. It would be the 40th anniversary of Samuel Huntington's Political Order and Changing Societies. And they're going to, Yale University was going to reissue a new volume, an anniversary reprint of the volume. And Huntington just recently died. I think maybe Huntington was alive or just about died, I think at the time. And Huntington invited Fukuyama to write I think they encouraged him to write the new introduction. And he does this, but at the same time, he's been in 2003, 2004. He's already doing work on state, saying, "Listen, the end of history can't do it because why? Not every people, all the developing places have states, and that the state isn't fully working, and we have to talk about failed states." So his focus shifted. I think his focus was always on the state development and political development, but in many ways, it really focused on political development in his after 2004, 2005. He wrote a book criticizing of his neoconservative friends and his direction, kind of a mea culpa, and therefore I think this made possible eventually not only his permanent job at Johns Hopkins, but then his later hiring at Stanford. He sold out. He sold out. This is how you get ahead in these kind of things, and he became the wonder boy of all the mainstream media establishment things. Not necessarily TV establishment, the articles at Atlantic Monthly, Time, all the right liberal journals would ask him to write for them, New Republic, things like that, and he would write their articles and he would then sometimes put books together because of those. And the same thing with he would take controversial claims like on identity, criticize the identity politics, But then he would write his book on identity that was interesting. Even some of the right wing identitarians, though they criticized Fukuyama as being a liberal, still nevertheless thought that book was useful because it did express. He did like his trust book. It was a good second. It gave a fantastic overview of what everyone was saying. So, like, the identity book was a very good book to get a good overview of like the question of identity, even though he was critical of right-wing national ethno identity and was a champion of liberalism. His new liberalism book is kind of like but it's there's balance to it. Now, Fukuyama's problem is that he's just sold. He has he's sold out to the university elites. He's part of this global elite. He likes liberalism. He thinks this is the way of the future. But at the same time, he's honest enough. But then at the same time, he's also kind of like, he doesn't want to admit that this is probably, he sees it, but then he wants, as political scientist says, I need to talk about this really. But then he defaults back into a kind of defense of liberalism. Joshua asks about Steven Pinker. Well, Pinker, the earlier Pinker in his works on human nature and biology is pretty good. His book on the human development thing is right, but he's too optimistic. He doesn't see the negative aspects of it as much as he should, and therefore. And also, he is too much of a globalist liberal. I call him. He's kind of like he doesn't see that he doesn't. He only sees the aggregate and doesn't see the crushed eggs and the crushed local realities of this. This is the problem with large aggregate thinking. You see the big picture, but you fail to see the trees and the fact that these trees are being destroyed. You see the benefit on the aggregate level, but you don't see how certain groups are suffering because of the situation. And politics is always about group behavior. Aggregation is one thing. It does, you might have positive aggregation of a result, but the reality on certain groups can be so negative, and that you can't deny this. And last but not least, Corlitz, our old friend Corlitz, 3 or 4 hours ago. Sent to me a link about my white pill, and I should talk about the white pill a little bit. He wrote about, I think it's a white pill idea is intriguing. Possibly AA entered his doomer romanticism phase because of the rapid decline of conservative cultural and political influence of the UK. I agree with this. I think that is the thing. I think it's despair. It's looking at how the conservatives have kind of become basically the useful idiots of the progressive left in England. That, in other words, instead of being an alternative to progressivism, they became like they're like the Republicans of the 1950s and 60s, who were they were arguing themselves to be the more Republican conservatism meant in the 1950s, 60s, kind of by the established Republicans is no, we're not going to undo the New Deal. We're just going to we're going to manage you. We're better managers of this liberal project. We'll give you kind of watered down progressivism, but managed well. Okay, that's the problem with the Tories in that sense. The Tories, Margaret Thatcher undid that, but then after the problem with that post-Thatcher world was the conservatives, and particularly after losing to Blair, wanted to win Blair again. In other words, Blair was basically a Margaret Thatcherite character who redefined the paradigm and co-opted this middle ground, the middle classes, and understood that the middle classes changed their interest. They used to be Tories, now they're not, and therefore he in other words, he advanced liberal positions, but at the same time making sure the middle class and the corporate classes were happy. That's the whole. This is the new direction of the left, right? This is the way it went. The neoliberal left. Okay, this coalition of progressive attitudes with neoliberalism, right? And the conservative response was, well, we'll just, again, this is a kind of they reverted to a kind of pre-Thatcherian position. Instead of doing a Thatcherite rejection of the nonsense and kind of reassert an alternative, the conservatives kind of been like, well, we're more moderate players, so they will enforce liberal policies and liberal identities. They're still neoliberals in terms of they were global traders and globalists as well as the in other words, they shared. In other words, the Tory establishment and the Blairite liberals, who were the Blairites and the Labour Party, shared the economic vision of neoliberalism and the importance of global trade to the political project. The difference was that one tried to use it to improve the condition of, in other words, to achieve social policy through it. The other one thought they were just going to advance individual choice and individual liberty, right? Two different directions, but they ultimately ended up perpetuating the kind of civil service state that ultimately led to a permanent bureaucracy. It always was there in England in that sense. So therefore, this is like things. He goes. Corlin goes. This seems to be perceptible here, and it's strange and disconcerting about the conservative, the cultural and political influence, the conservative cultural influence in the UK being completely destroyed. I think it's because until recently, British conservatism seemed solid. Exactly before this, but post Thatcher and then post the rise of Cameron and Cameron's compromise, and then the betrayal by Boris. Boris said one thing but did another. Right. This is the that's the problem, and that conservatives now talk Brexit, but then net zero, right, and global and migration. Okay, it's the same thing. Problem here. So now it goes, but now it looks like AA is drifting into WW revisionism, and at the same time he refuses to look at post-45 studies of the Third Reich and fascism. So I have doubts that this will generate any useful insights, and I agree with you. This he said a white pill is more balanced and could be good in that sense. So I'd like to go back to my point about the white pill that I raised last week. I know people are going to say, "Well, what is the white pill?" Well, the white pill is simply just my position is, and someone asked me to talk about Ural Haveri. I don't know. He's just he's a liberal. I read his book on some things. He has realistic points, but then he just has the paranoid of the populace, and the populism is, oh, that's authoritarianism. And yeah, it's a whole different argument I want to get into. But back to the white pill, and we'll end up on this theme of the white pill. The white pill is, to me, something that I wrote last week about this, again, this metaphor from Matrix, and the red pill and the blue pill, right? The red pill is you see the reality as it is, and the blue pill is we just accept the delusion and be happy, right? And the idea of red pilling is that we see the world more critically, and we see the flaws, and we see the things, and we see the reality. But the problem with the red pill is that the red pill often leads us to the cynicism, and that's what we call the black pill. The black pill is this, oh my God, things are bad, it's all doomed, we can't win, it's set against us, it's kind of fatalism, fatal doom. This is romantic doomerism. I think that's the Corlitz's quote of doomer romanticism, I think is correct in that sense. This inevitability, the structure that the system is set up and you can't fight the system, and that it's going to be crushing you, and it's this surrender. This leads us to kind of this, and there's kind of reactions to this black pill is, to one sense, is a politicism, like what we call the Benedict intervention. No, the Benedict. What do you call it? What is that? The Benedict solution. Rod Deer's a famous thing, about arguing that we should just avoid politics and religious life for going to monasteries, go like in the monasteries, follow the medieval Christians into going to monasteries and do a similar thing with us, revert into private life, revert into this kind of thing. Named after Benedict. I always have problems with this. The Benedict what? My brain is old. The Benedict option. That's what it is. The Benedict option. And the problem with the Benedict option, this is as much a black pill as doomerism, or World War II revanchism, fascist revanchism. This is just a dark path that's going down this, that everything is a conspiracy, bad, destruction. And there's kind of either a I'm going to you can do accelerationism, hope things get bad, and that everything gets crushed and everything's destroyed, and that we can recover from it, or or we have the idea that we can just retreat. Again, this is the Benedict option is kind of a black pill also in that sense. The black pill is it's like the system can't be fixed, and it's pointless trying to fix it. Now, the white pill is, like I said, is the opposite of the black pill in that sense. It is not the opposite of the red pill. In other words, it is not delusion. It's not delusional. It's not kind of the term that the opposite of everything's what is that? Not the sky is falling, the sky is falling aspect, but that everything is fine and dandy, and I just don't see anything wrong in the world. I forget that the metaphor we use for that. Not chaotic, but everything is fine. It's not. It's a denial of what's the thing, and it's like everything's fine, and I'm not going to pay attention to this. Whereas the problem with this is that, well, this is not. The white pill is merely to be understood as a situation to see the hope, to see the positive within the thing, that see reality and look for the means to assert positive outcome. That you look, it's hopeful that there's a future, that there's possibility of victory. That victory is possible. That it's not a doomerism, not a doomed situation, but rather a positive one. So I think I want to talk about that some more, maybe in a future video. Red pill, black pill, black pill, white pill, black pill, blue pill, white pill. Well, blue pill, red pill, blue pill, black pill, white pill. That would be kind of a video I might like to talk about this situation and why these things are kind of important. The last thing I want to talk about is something I talked about before. This is the debate, and I want to talk about it because this is published by Spence Publishing in 1997. I think it's published in 97. It's available. It's a paperback. I got both hardback and paperback. It's 1997. It's published right after it started as a debate of a fight at the magazine. The November 1996 issue of the magazine had a response to a court decision, which was basically it was the response to a court decision, and the court ruled in a certain way, and that we argued that this was judicial tyranny. In other words, he goes that I'll read this: the judicial usurpation. In other words, and a democracy, the judicial usurpation of politics. And the question mark at the in the title was missed by many critics, and indeed, and omitted in some published comments on the symposium. The present book contains the original symposium and the representative selection of the storm of controversy it provoked. In the end, an extended essay, The Anatomy of the Controversy, I offer my own evaluation of what happened and is happening. As the editor said in the November issue discussing the judicial activism and the imperial judiciary, is hardly new. Such discussions have been a staple of public discourse. He's writing this in the 90s, okay, for at least a decade debate. So how is this new? And he's arguing, in other words, this was a very interesting debate. Now, in First Things magazine, it was in other words, the symposium was planned and the meeting of the editorial board on May 1996. And the editorial board was there. There was a lot of participants. The original participants were very interesting because the paper, the editor writes that the editor first thing talks about in the introduction. Robert Bork, Judge Bork, gives our judicial oligarchy. Russell Hittinger writes a crisis of legitimacy. Hadley Arks writes a culture corrupted. Charles Colson writes The Kingdom and Its Conflict, and Robert George, The Tyrant State. And what happened immediately was that the neocons came out and played. William Bennett, at the time, remember he was like the Secretary of Education under Bush, and then kind of like was kind of making his stuff career as a public intellectual with his books of virtues and things like this in the 1990s. Bill Bennett was trying to push the idea of like this, and he was kind of seen as a neoconservative icon of education and critical of this. Peter Berger, who was not a neoconservative but more economic conservative and quasi, but a part of the First Things Agreement was kind of critical of this also, because they saw that, wait a minute, democracy, yes, the court is bad, but we're not Nazi Germany yet. Walter Burns, again, bringing up Straussian, but Georgetown was kind of critical, part of the AEI crowd, American Enterprise Institute crowd. So therefore, you had Bennett, Burns, Decker, Kimmerfob, Crystal, Bill Crystal, all doing this. And then what happened was you had Mary Ann Gilden kind of coming out. She's at Harvard University. She was and Bush's, I think the first, she was a Harvard law professor dealing with the question of limits of rights. And then you had James Dobson, who was kind of a Dobson was, I think, if I remember correctly, he was a preacher, right? Dobson was, and still was the founder and president of Focus on the Family, right, in Colorado. So he kind of maybe came out in favor of the thing. These are the question of these things. The editors of National Review came out of thing. Norman Podhoretz, again, a commentary came out of this. Aaron Stelzer, and Weigel comes out, and then the correspondence. At first thing they had the correspondence and the editors of First Thing, then responses to the thing of the debate. So part one is the original symposium. Part two is the response to the debate, and then part three is the War of the Roses, where the editors of National Review give their tech thing. Then the anti-American temptation criticism, that is David Brooks gives his attack, and Tom Benthel, but also middle one, Sam Harris. And Sam Harris is interesting here. Sam Francis, sorry, not Sam Harris, Sam Francis, wrong hat. Not the atheist, but Sam Francis, the conservative writer, Southern conservative. He goes, recriminations among neoconservatives are always amusing, if only for the polemical nastiness with which they are conducted. Yet the significance of the controversy over the First Thing Symposium reaches well beyond mere irony. Its meaning was to some extent elucidated by David Brooks, who noted that it excluded a tone of crisis, a sense of history itself is moving in the wrong direction, and that this is a tone of mainstream conservatism has not used to in a long while. In other words, this is the new conservatism. This is the moment. The positive conservatism of Reagan versus, there's a crisis and we're losing, we're going back, and we have to really do something about it. Of course, what Brooke means by mainstream conservatism is neoconservatism. Among paleoconservatives, the view that the history is moving in the wrong direction is and always has been commonplace. One of the basic assumptions of almost all schools of paleoconservative thought has always been that something in America, the West or the modern age, has gone wrong. This is not true for neocons, whose adoption of a species of conservatism is predicated on the essential rightness of the modern American government and society, and the direction of its historical course in the modern age in general. Indeed, it is an anti-American thrust of the left that perpetuated the neocons' break with the left. And as they have made clear over the years, neoconservatives are unable to distinguish the anti-Americanism of the left from the conservatism and fundamentally patriotic critique of American history and American culture mounted by paleoconservatives. And this is the argument. In other words, neocons look at the paleoconservatives and they say, "Oh, you're just as bad as the left," right? This is the so-called horseshoe hypothesis, that the neoconservatives were attacking America, or their attack on the New Deal and things like this is just as bad as the left's attack on New Deal. At peace with the direction of history, the neoconservative emerge not as serious critics of the current regime, but rather its inveritable defenders and apologists. Now, this is how telling this is in the age of Trump. Think of Bill Kristol's, and a lot of neoconservatives are voices and how their hatred of Trump. In many ways, this debate is really high. And I think Sam Francis' essay here is a very good response to the problem, and it spells out the problem in a certain way. He goes, to be sure, Podhoretz and his friends have a point. A good deal of the discussion of legitimacy in the first thing symposium is careless, if not downright ignorant of elementary political theory. In first place, the whole symposium was crouched in the terms of David Henry Thoreau and Leadwell Gallerson's and Martin Luther King's concept of legitimacy, whereby any deviation of a political order. In other words, this is, even though he's critical of neoconservatives, Sam will criticize Neuhaus. See, the problem was Neuhaus himself was a creature of the neoconservatives. You have to remember that. But he was also religious. And he was this, and he was open to people. Now, you have to remember, this is so funny that it's, one of the essays that were in it by someone, Bork, right? Robert Bork is a fellow traveler of the neocons. His argument was the neocon argument. Hadley Arks was religious conservative. Russell Hittinger, he was a Straussian Catholic University. Strauss influenced by, I think, in the philosophy school, not the science theory school, but he ends up teaching at University of St. Thomas in Houston, right, to this very day. I know Russell in that sense. We were kind of friendly friends on email and stuff. Charles Colson, the very Nixon guy who becomes Christian Prison Development, and then Robbie George, who is famous Princeton professor of political theory and Catholic conservative, and his articles, probably his and Colson's articles, are the most dark and the problematic of the pieces in that sense. As Arks are, Hadley Ark and Colson are kind of, Hadley Ark and Robbie George are kind of the two horsemen of the what we call the cultural wars critique of the radical left and abortion and things like that. So when we look at someone like Sam Francis' position is that, hey, listen, the problem is that, your whole point is wrong. You have to have a better understanding of this question of legitimacy. And he goes, nowhere does the symposium dwell on the importance between their cases and those of contemporary America of what is, the case of Moore, Antigone, today no one is commanded to have or perform an abortion on the sufferer or perform euthanasia. The law to which the symposia's object are permissive, not compulsive, and how one might resist such permissive laws are never clear. Pour chicken blood on abortion clinics, kill abortionists by embracing the subjective doctrine of disobedience of Garrison and King, to whom Neuhaus himself was an aide. King, not the King. The contributors come very close to embracing the very dangerous logic of that position. Once you have decided that the state does not conform to the higher law as revealed to your own conscience, which is easily confused with your own interests, preferences, and passions, and that you have only the duty to make it conform, then there is no limit to how far you will go. So again, finally, for the two misinsinuations of desperate deeds in the symposium, none of the contributors bothers to explore the very serious and obviously legal and political remedies for the woes that are taking place. Judge Bork does indeed comment on the fruitality of both reason and reform in trying to restrain the courts for decades. He suggests some constitutional amendments to correct the courts, but he is none too sanguine about the project of doing so. Yet, in truth, there are many corrective measures that neither neoconservatives nor the Republican Party have attempted to sponsor. They could seek to limit the appellate jurisdiction of the court. Again, this is correct. They could encourage governors and local officials to simply ignore or to ignore and disobey illicit court mandates. They could impeach judges and justices and judges. They could even muster more opposition to judicial nominations than the Republicans in the last 2 years and their majority have in Congress have shown any disposition to do. And they could also make it very unpleasant for the court, reducing judges' salary to $1 a year, terminating their clerical support, throw them out of their offices into the streets. In fact, that judges like the Pope have no battalions, no instruments of force to which they can back up their decrees. And without such instruments, they can construct a tyranny only with the passive or active cooperation of the slaves they seek to rule. So I read that passage from, this is why this debate in this book is a good copy of the whole debate. And this is why I would recommend anyone who wants to, this is, the end of democracy debate. And I think Francis is right. That at the time, even at the time, I thought that Robbie George and Hardliox were going a little too far. Yes, this was a bad thing. And in fact, that was basically, I was in agreement with Bork. I was never a big fan. Ark's a very interesting fellow, and he has some good works on things, but he goes too far on religious issues and abortion and things like that. And same thing with Robbie George. I've never been persuaded by them. They're just too extremist in my view, in that sense. Dogmatic extremists. And it's due to their analytical, their philosophical analytical philosophy basis too. They insist that the logic, this analytical logic, be applied to political things, and I'm kind of suspicious, always been suspicious of that, in that sense. So therefore, this is why I mentioned this debate today. I want to talk about this, and I only mentioned my last time in the thing here, because I think it's a good. I mentioned this book. I recommend this book for people studying this, because to understand what happened in the Trump and the reaction to Trump, in that sense, this is and why the neocons. Why did many conservative neocons and what we call the establishment rhino, we call them rhinos now, right? Took the stance that they did, and it's really like the concern. This is that this was a kind of ironically, this was within the neocons. The two wings of neocons went at each other. The theologically religious neocon versus the religious conservative. This is what led to people in the late 1990s talk about the difference between theocons and neocons, right? This is why some people like, what's his name? Oh, God, he's a pain in the ass on Newsweek. My mind is blanking. So that's it. The theocon neocon debate like this, but this theocon neocon debate hit certain important issues. It pointed out certain inconsistencies on both sides, but also pointed to the problem, because what they were kind of what today's our transgenderism and the euthanasia and postpartum abortions. What Robbie George and those guys talked about was they were kind of like ahead of the game. In other words, 30 years later, what was this panic? People were saying, "Oh, this is not the case. You're just being exaggerated." They turned out to be right on these issues. That this is now the practice. Like in countries like both in Dutch, they killed a young woman who was brutal. Her friends were killed, and she was a survivor. They put her to death because she couldn't handle the grief anymore. That the state put people to death because of suffering and psychological problems. The Canadian government is encouraging the extermination of the mentally ill and things like this. This is the problem of what we see here in that sense. This is what was kind of just a fear that we would get there. Well, we got there in that sense. and that the state started to do things like that. So therefore, this is why I make reference to this book, and I think it's a very useful thing in that sense for our purposes of those who wish to understand these issues and fights. And you see me putting the book back, but I'm going to do that because I won't lose it halfway. So that's it. Well, nice talking to you. This is a good stream. It's been over 20 minutes. I hope everything's okay. It's great with you. Please like it. No one's here by now, so I haven't gone. So I hope no one liked it. So we hope they like it. Hit like it. Put comments on things which you want me to talk about, or issues that you wish me to talk about. Maybe I need to talk about Fukuyama. I should make maybe I should make a list, right? Of Fukuyama maybe, but I don't want to. I've talked about Fukuyama many times. And other things. Okay, take care and have please like it. If you want to follow me on social media, the social media links are below. My academic social media, if you want to follow me in my research and things like this, the academic social media are below that. And if you want to help me contribute to what I do here, you can do so through the links to Subscribestar and Patreon, or buying one of my books through either Amazon, either directly at your bookstore or Amazon or Barnes & Noble online seller, or to the publisher themselves. Okay, take care and see you next week. Take care. Bye.